Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. This season for Discovery, I want to do something a little different. In addition to my weekly review videos, I've launched a new show where I do a deep dive into each episode of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. I present hidden bits, Easter eggs, connections to the rest of Star Trek canon, and theories about what I think is up for this season. For now, I'm calling it Dan's Disco Deep Dives. So without further ado, here is my deep dive into Season 2, Episode 1, Brother. Brother was written by Ted Sullivan and Gretchen J. Berg and Aaron Harberts, and directed by Alex Kurtzman. At the end of last season, we left the Discovery having just made contact with the USS Enterprise. It turns out that something catastrophic has happened to completely shut her down. Thankfully, Burnham reports that her entire complement, 203, is alive. Star Trek fans might remember that the Enterprise's complement was given as 400 and some during the original series. However, the 203 number comes from Canon Trek as well. In The Cage, Captain Pike gives the Enterprise's complement as 203.
I'm tired of being responsible for 203 lives, and I'm tired of deciding which mission is too risky and which isn't, and who's going on the landing party and who doesn't, and who lives, and who dies.
Captain Pike and two officers beam aboard the Discovery, and we get a look at one of the transporter operators who seems to be sporting some pretty fancy headgear. It seems likely that this is a predecessor to the visor, or visual instrument and sensory organ replacement, that we see Geordi LaForge wearing in Star Trek The Next Generation. It makes sense that this is a bit bulkier than LaForge's, as it has about a century of refinement still to come. Burnham expects Spock to beam aboard, as they were informed that Captain Pike was bringing an engineer and a science officer, but instead, Evan Connolly is the science officer in question. It's possible we've seen him before in Star Trek, thanks to some probably coincidental aesthetic similarities between Connolly, played by Sean Connolly Affleck, and this science officer seen in The Cage, and played by Ed Madden. The arguments against this theory is the fact that the officer from The Cage was listed as a geologist, while Connolly seems to be more of a senior sciences officer. However, since The Cage occurs about 3 years before this episode, there's time for him to make the switch. When Captain Pike introduces himself to Saru, he mentions Mojave, which is given as his hometown in The Cage. In fact, in The Cage, we get a glimpse of the city, presumably located in what used to be the Mojave Desert. The other officer that accompanies Pike is Commander Nan, an engineer. She would seem to be a Barzan, a species that has only appeared one other time in Star Trek, in the TNG episode The Price, where the Barzans, represented by Premier Bhavani, negotiate the sale of a wormhole discovered in their star system. Shortly after arriving on Discovery, the trio from the Enterprise board a turbolift with Burnham and Saru, along with Linus, who has an unfortunate nasal encounter with Connolly. Linus, we're told, is a Saurian. The Saurians have only been seen once before among the crew of the Enterprise in Star Trek The Motion Picture. For the most part, I'd say it's a pretty good update of the makeup for this species, formerly only seen in the background. While discussing why Spock didn't transport over to the Discovery, SAREK says that he and Spock have not seen each other in years. First of all, a minor nitpick, SAREK as a Vulcan would probably answer something like 5 years, 6 months, and 11 days, or something like that. Putting that aside, however, it makes sense that Spock and SAREK haven't spoken. As we've heard a number of times in Trek canon, they didn't speak to each other for years due to SAREK's disappointment over Spock joining Starfleet. In last season's Discovery episode Lethe, we learn an added component. SAREK kept Burnham from taking a spot in the Vulcan Expeditionary Force, holding it open for Spock, who ultimately gave it up when he chose Starfleet over the Vulcan Science Academy. This next one isn't so much a canon connection as much as it is me wanting to gush a bit. Kudos to Discovery costume designer Gersha Phillips, whose designs are always top-notch. Check out these spacesuits. Starfleet officers' butts have never looked so good. The costumes themselves are somewhat reminiscent of the suits worn by Kirk, Olsen, and Sulu in Star Trek 2009. Thanks to a mess-up by Ensign Tilly, Pike's service record is revealed for the bridge crew to see. In his record, we see a number of commendations. The Star Cross. First mentioned in the TNG episode The Measure of a Man, other recipients of the Star Cross have included Lieutenant Commander Data, Captain Jonathan Archer, and Captain Philippa Georgiou. The Legion of Honor. First mentioned in the TOS episode Court Martial, the Legion of Honor has also been awarded to Dr. Leonard McCoy, Lieutenant Commander Data, Captain Philippe Georgiou, and Admiral Terral announced that Captain Gabriel Lorca would be receiving it in last season's episode Into the Forest I Go. The Carrington Award, mentioned in the DS9 episode Profit Motive. Dr. Julian Bashir was nominated for the award but did not win. Curiously, the Carrington was described as one of the most prestigious honors awarded by the Federation in the field of medicine, and that it was typically regarded as a sort of lifetime achievement award. Curious that Captain Pike would have received it. Perhaps this is a different Carrington Award? The Rigel Cup, an award granted to pilots. Nova Squadron, the flight group Cadet Wesley Crusher was part of, won the Rigel Cup, as mentioned in the TNG episode The First Duty. The Okuda Award, named for Michael Okuda, former Star Trek Scenic Art Supervisor. And the Legate's Crest of Valor, a Cardassian Award, first mentioned in Voyager's Nothing Human. I'd love to hear the story of how this came about. Pike's records also show Robert April as his direct predecessor as captain of the Enterprise. Seen in the animated series episode The Counterclock Incident, April has never been seen in live-action Trek, but was referenced last season in an on-screen graphic in the episode Choose Your Pain. During the mission to rescue survivors of the downed USS Hiawatha, the ill-fated Connolly mentions a roommate from the Academy, a Cation. The most prominent Cation we've seen is Lieutenant Maress from the animated series. This marks the first time the species' name has been mentioned in live-action Star Trek, although Cations did appear in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home and Star Trek Into Darkness. The USS Hiawatha, described as a medical frigate, is named for the co-founder of the Iroquois Confederacy. The engineer of the Hiawatha, Commander Reno, mentions that a Bolian was among the people killed when the ship crashed. Bolians are ubiquitous in the Federation by the 24th century, but this is the earliest they are mentioned being on a Starfleet ship. The Ferengi in Enterprise do mention the Bolians a century earlier, however. After witnessing Reno's success in saving the critically injured, Non exclaims, "You're an engineer, not a surgeon?" This may be a stretch, but this reminded me of another 23rd century doctor.
I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
While setting up the evacuation of wounded from the crashed Hiawatha, transport pattern enhancers are set up. This is the first time we've seen 23rd century transport pattern enhancers, but you may be familiar with their 24th century counterparts, seen a number of times on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Near the end of the episode, Captain Pike notices a discarded fortune from Lorca's fortune cookie collection on the floor of the ready room. It's possible that this is a reference to TOS's first pilot, The Cage, and the follow-up, The Menagerie, foreshadowing Pike's ultimate fate to rejoin the Telosians in their cage, which would actually become his salvation following a debilitating accident. I also have a personal theory that the second part of the fortune, Not Every Loss is Eternal, may be foreshadowing the return of Dr. Hugh Culber at some point this season. At the very end of the episode, Burnham visits Spock's quarters aboard the Enterprise. While the physical space looks quite different from what we've seen before, there are a number of touches that link it to TOS. Red highlights, harkening back to the bright red doors of TOS, the corridor outside Spock's quarters is a stark red color. The doors. The sound the doors make is similar to the iconic sound of TOS's automatic doors. The number of Spock's quarters is the same as his quarters in TOS, revealed in the episode Amok Time. There is a Vulcan lyre, Spock's harp, from TOS, a TOS-style chair, and a 3D chess set, which Spock was fond of playing in the original series. The room divider that's featured is also very similar to ones we see in the original series. I want to end each episode of Dan's Disco Deep Dives with a theory about what I think is coming up in the rest of the season for Star Trek Discovery. This week, my theory has to do with the red bursts and the role that the Red Angels will play in the rest of the season. In this episode, when Discovery tracks down the only remaining of the 7 red signals that allows itself to be discovered, they find that the red signal is gone. However, it has led them to a Starfleet ship in distress with personnel who have been stranded for over 10 months. From some of the trailers we've seen, we know that the Red Angels appear to people who are in great anguish or distress. Indeed, Burnham sees one when she is injured following the rescue. My theory is that the signals point to where people are in trouble or in distress, which is why this signal led Discovery to the Hiawatha. In this way, the Red Angels will present themselves as allies and maybe even gain followers who think of them as some sort of savior. Of course, I think it will all turn out to be in the service of some nefarious plan that we don't know about yet. Anyway, that's just my theory. So what are your theories about this episode and your thoughts about what has been presented in this video? Please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I especially love different people's theories about what they think is going on. Admittedly, we don't have a lot to go on yet, but hopefully we get some really cool theories and see if they pan out over the course of the season. Speaking of comments, I want to thank everyone for the overwhelmingly positive comments in the last video. That really made my day. I really appreciate it. Thanks for appreciating what I'm trying to do with this channel and presenting kind of a more positive side of Star Trek fandom. Keep them coming. I love hearing from you. Thanks so much. I'm overwhelmed with how those comments made me feel. Thank you so much. So of course, keep an eye out for the second episode of Discovery Season 2, New Eden, which airs on Thursday night on CBS All Access in the US and Space Channel in Canada, and Friday on Crave TV in Canada and Netflix in the rest of the world. And speaking of episode 2, on Friday night, I will be guesting on the live show, Live from the Edge, from the Trek FM network on Friday night, doing our kind of live reaction to that episode. I'll have a link to that in the description below, a link to their channel where you can find that live video, which goes live on Friday night at 9 Eastern, I believe the time is. Thank you, of course, to the Patreon supporters for helping to support the channel. I really do appreciate it. To everyone else out there, you have only a few days left to enter the draw for Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery on Blu-ray. If you become a patron of this channel on Patreon for $5 or more before January 30th midnight, you will be entered in a draw for that Blu-ray set. So there's not a lot of entries yet, I'm sad to say, but if you get your name in, you have a pretty good shot. Thank you everyone else for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you feel this video is worthy, and share it with somebody you think might appreciate it. Thank you again so much for watching, and until next time, fly good.